Hey everybody, and welcome back to Nancy Drew Mobile Mystery Shadow Ranch. We just had a scare with a rattlesnake, and I think it's time for Nancy to solve the mystery. When CJ and the three girls re-enter the great room, they find the Rowleys struggling to convince their guests to stay. We're in the middle of the desert, Uncle Ed insists. Things like this happen. It's natural. Even Mrs. Thurmond and some of the cowboys are starting to look uneasy. None of the other ranches seem to be having problems like we got, Shorty drawls. Does make you wonder. And just because something's a natural disaster doesn't make it less of a disaster, Jim adds. Adventure is one thing, Dallas concurs, but out-and-out danger is quite another. Suddenly, Nancy speaks up. The fact is, the cougar, the mice, the snake, those things didn't happen naturally. Everyone falls silent and turns to look at her. Someone made them happen, and that someone is right here in this room. Dun, 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 dun. Now, who is responsible? Is it CJ, Shorty, Dave, or Eunice? One of these four people is responsible for all these mysterious accidents with these dangerous animals. I'm going to show you all possible answers. Let's start with Shorty. Nancy points at Shorty. It was Shorty! Well, now, I'm pretty sure I'd remember doing something like that, he drawls thoughtfully. And since I don't, I'm pretty sure you're wrong. You were up on Stony Ridge taking the deer leg to feed the cougar, but you had to leave the cooler there because you saw us coming up. Then you made those cougar prints, caught the mice and the snake, and came back here. I did all that and made a pie? Shorty asks, genuinely puzzled. You went out and bought the pie. I forgot to mention that. Shorty turns to the cowboys in the room. What about it, fellas? Was that a store-bought pie? The ranch hand's reply is swift, sure, and unanimous. No way, absolutely not, they chorus. Shorty looks at Nancy and shrugs, apologetically. My cooking don't lie, Miss Nancy. If you think I've done any of that stuff, you're just plain wrong. Darn, foiled by good cooking. Okay, so again, who do you think is responsible? CJ, Dave, or Eunice? I'm pretty sure it was Dave. Nancy points at Dave. It was Dave. His jaw drops in disbelief. You think I'm the bad guy? But why? Why would I do any of that stuff? Because you're angry and frustrated that I pay so little attention to you, but you can't bring yourself to hurt me, so you're taking it out on the Shadow Ranch instead. She shrugs. Everyone knows you have a major crush on me. No, not no more I don't, he declares. Even I'm not buying this, Nancy, Aunt Bet sighs. Best alternate ending ever. Okay, again, who do you think is responsible? CJ, Shorty, or Eunice? Let's do Eunice. Nancy gets up and points at Eunice. It was her! The ranch hand's face turned sunburned red. What? We saw you skulking around with coded notes about payment. You mean that stupid old piece of paper I saw blown across the ranch? I was on litter duty cleaning up after you city slickers. Then why were you so jumpy? I could ask you why you're always sneaking up on everybody. The guests nod in agreement. She does have a point, Nancy, Bess whispers. Eunice folds her arms. Got any other proof? Nancy sits down meekly. No. All right, so time to catch the real culprit, CJ. Nancy points at CJ. It was him. CJ looks stunned, as does Bess. Nancy, she hisses, appalled. What are you doing? And I know you were the one we saw on the ridge just before we heard the cougar. That's why you assumed Smokey was Bess's horse instead of Pal. You didn't know she and George had switched horses. George and Bess exchange a look of realization, then turn toward CJ, their expressions hardening as Nancy goes on. CJ rolls his eyes. And just what was I doing up there on the cliff that makes me the bad guy? Feeding the cougar, Nancy states. At dinner you said that someone left a deer leg out for the cougar under some bear grass. There was no way you could have known about the bear grass unless you were the one to leave it there. Well, CJ stammers. Maybe I just guessed. Hardly, Nancy continues. You lured that cougar here, and then set it loose on Shadow Ranch property. CJ masks his growing distress with a show of disbelief. I can't believe I'm hearing this. Catching some mice and a snake and letting them go in here would have been simple for you as well. Seemingly fed up, he puts on his hat and marches towards the door. I don't have to listen to this. Now hold on a minute, CJ, Uncle Ed says, going after him, but the young man doesn't stop. She can't prove any of this. She's nuts, and all of you are nuts for listening to her. He hurries out the door and heads for his truck as Nancy calls after him. Oh, but I can prove it. Do you want to know how, or shall I just save it for the sheriff? As CJ climbs behind the wheel, Nancy calls out, Tell Sam Nash Shadow Ranch says back off. What's he got to do with this? CJ says, giving Nancy a genuinely confused look. He starts the engine, then tears off down the driveway. Nancy turns back and finds a room full of people staring at her, stunned by everything that's happened. Should we call the sheriff? Aunt Bet finally asks. Nancy shakes her head. The truth is, I really don't have any proof. I just want CJ to think I do. You think Sam Nash was the one behind all this? Aunt Bet asks. I did, Nancy says. But he seemed really confused when I brought up Nash. I don't think he was acting. Me neither, Uncle Ed agrees. Later that day, as the girls head down to the barn, Bess expresses her disappointment. I can't believe CJ turned out to be such a creep. I can't believe he's getting away scot-free, her cousin joins in. Actually, I think deep down he's not a creep, Nancy observes, which means he isn't getting away scot-free. I think his conscience is going to eat away at him for selling out like that for a long, long time. When they reach the barn, Tex saunters over to them. Pretty smart thing you done this morning, he tells Nancy with a faint, grudging smile. Got a good head on your shoulders. But as for you two... He turns to Bess and George. The smile is gone. The growl is back. What's this I hear about you switching horses? Tex barks. It's just, Bess begins, before being cut off by Tex. Just nothing. You two go clean up the tack room and get all the mice in there. Tex smirks, then turns to Nancy. You don't gotta help. Okay, so if we don't have to help, we won't help. Once Bess and George finish the demystification, they meet back in Nancy's room. Bess rubs her shoulder, glaring in the direction of the stables. The way Tex treats us, Bess grumbles, you'd think we were public enemy number 1. I chose not to help Bess and George not because I'm a mean person, but because I've never been able to successfully solve that challenge, so by skipping it, I don't get to look like a failure. Let's continue. He's got a chip on his shoulder, all right, George says. But he must be good at what he does if Uncle Ed keeps him on. Maybe he's just too afraid to fire him, Bess says. I know I couldn't. If I tried, I'd probably get scared and end up giving him a raise. Nancy can't help but laugh, nodding in agreement. He's a little intimidating. He's a little on the intimidating side for sure, but he's not that bad. Not that bad? Bess exclaims. Yes, that bad! She does have a compelling argument, George says. Now, what should we do with the rest of the... Shh, Nancy interrupts. A low whistle sounds quietly into the night. Eerie, but familiar. It's back. In a flash, Nancy rushes out of the room. Bess and George follow close behind. When they catch up to Nancy, she's standing rigid near the split rail fence. Nancy points towards a distant glowing figure darting across the desert flats, leaving a pale, wispy trail of light in its path. It's Dirk Valentine's ghost horse! Bess exclaims. The phantom figure suddenly rears and turns towards the ranch, not back towards the ranch. Without warning, it breaks into a full galloping stride. The glowing horse hurtles headlong towards the girls in an angry rush. Within seconds, it's close enough to hear its hooves pounding on the desert floor. This is bad, Bess hisses through gritted teeth. What do we do? Before Nancy can answer, another whistle carries across the night. This time it's high-pitched and warbly and cuts out suddenly. The horse reaches the split-rail fence and skids to a sudden stop. For a long moment the horse glares at the girls, frothing and snarling in frustration. It rears wildly, hooves chopping the air. Nancy sprints towards the stables. "Nancy, what are you doing?" Bess calls. "We're going to follow that horse," Nancy calls back. Will the girls catch the horse? Is it truly a spectral beast from beyond? And will the ghost of Dirk Valentine return to claim his revenge on Shadow Ranch? The answers to these questions and more are found in the next chapter, Bad Luck Doll.